Well, I'm a big fan of Appendage. I love this movie so much. I had a chance to talk with the director and the editor and producer. I would love to know just what drew you to the film. What made you want to get involved in the project?
Sure. So Anna and I had actually we've been friends since college. We were, we were in film school together. We shot a thesis together our last year there. So we've been working together a long time. Honestly, the whole crew kind of goes back pretty far. I was in high school with Alex Camillion, the producer and editor. So we've all been working together honestly since about 2016. And so when Anna said, hey, I have this weird short for a segment of Halloween. Do you want to come on? Sort of a no brainer. So hopped on the short, and then day two of the short, David, the head of the studio, came and said, "Hey, we want this to be a feature. How you guys feel about that?" Which is a crazy experience on a short film. Very much an unexpected way for the second day to go. So, it very serendipitously just all happened.
Yeah, so you knew like when you were filming the short that it was going to be a feature?
Yeah, yeah. The day one, they had been watching the feed. It was still COVID era, so not many people were on set, but they had a Zoom feed of everything we were shooting while we were shooting it, and so we were all talking, and they just liked how we worked, and they liked how the short went. So they handed us the feature very early on.
Well, yeah, since you did work on the feature, obviously for bite-sized Halloween, and the film, it's a much more condensed version of the film. How did your creative choices kind of differ working on, different iterations of the same story?
Sure, it was a mix of honestly creative and technical. I guess I'm gonna start with the puppet because everybody loves the puppet. So yeah, on the short film, the puppet was honestly very different. The eyes were actually not real. We had like some models on set, but they got digitally reworked so they could kind of move and look around in post. The arms were full size arms that were operated by rods, and so every shot of the puppet that had the arms moving actually had to be like a lock off, and no one could move. Basically, actors couldn't move, I couldn't move. It was just a static shot of the puppet so that we could get a background plate and get rid of the rods later. And then once we got around to the feature, we wanted the actors to have more freedom. We wanted the camera to have more freedom. We realized, if someone was in this situation, they'd be freaking out and running around, and they needed the room to do that. So the little puppet changed and became this. It had no arms. It got these little nubs, and so they just kind of flop. They don't really do anything in the feature version. But the mouth was actually fully operated by a microphone, and so one of the special effects artists could speak the lines into it, and it would just talk, and it didn't need to be tethered to anything, and it just did its own thing. And the eyes were actually now practical as well. So basically, the puppet is what you saw on set, and so Hadley could just act with it, and she could run around the room, and she could move, and it would move, and there were kind of no restrictions with that version of it. The later puppet, that's a different story. But creatively, as far as kind of the look and the feeling of it, the short was a lot campier. The short had like a very, very kind of retro, silly vibe to it, and that was reflected in the look. There was more grain. It was a crazier pushed grade. Like it felt very, just everything felt very enhanced. And when I got the feature script, it's still funny. It's supposed to be a horror comedy, but it also does deal with heavier topics, and Hannah's backstory is very sad. So the look of the film had to mature a little bit. It became a little more earnest and dramatic, but still kept the sense of play the short had. So you knew you were allowed to laugh, but we didn't want to totally take away from what the actors are doing when they were giving us the heavier moments. So the tone, honestly, was one thing that Anna and I had to discuss the most out of everything. We can get into that more with references, I guess, if you will. There were where the short was like just its own weird slapstick beast. Anna wanted the feature. Her main reference was actually The Fly. It has that sort of, it's silly, but it's gross. And then it gets really sad when he's completely transformed, and it's that heartbreaking shot of him as full fly, but it's also still funny and disgusting. And that was sort of the balance we tried to play, where it's like you're crying one moment, you're laughing the next, you're throwing up after that, and still it all exists within the same film.
Yeah, no, that's actually in line with something else that I wanted to ask you about because obviously, I mean, in Appendage, a lot of the horror aspect comes from, the premise and the internal fears of the main character. So how does your approach on like a horror comedy like this differ from, if you were filming, a horror movie full of jump scares?
Sure. Yeah, the main thing is making sure when it honestly had two parts to it. The first was making sure that the audience felt like they were looking at a movie that wasn't taking itself so seriously they didn't think they could laugh at certain beats. And so, we tried to film some of the jump scares still traditionally, but once the puppet comes on screen, a big part of it was honestly the color story that we worked out for Hannah. A lot of the lighting and the production design, everything adheres to a set of tones that we worked out to maybe help people even subconsciously figure out where she's at and what's going on. Basically, you look at honestly, a lot of my favorite horror movies, but they have a very either, take Evil Dead 2013, not a funny looking movie. You're still allowed to laugh at it, but like there's scenes where she's wandering around the house at the beginning that are like steely blue and sad and high contrast and dark. And you get the sense that like, okay, right now we're supposed to feel that she is not great. And even when the violence and everything gets heightened and ridiculous, you still had a grounded sense at the beginning that things fucking sucked for Mia. And so we wanted that same sort of through line where when Hannah is feeling her worst and we're in her head, you'll see the image tends to skew a little more gold or orange. And then when the appendage is taking over, things skew a little bit more green. And when you're supposed to be feeling like you're comfortable or she's with friends, like the bar scene, which we kind of hammed up because it was our one scene we could, it goes like full blue. And you'll notice that like at the end of the movie, blue is also a big theme in her wardrobe, and the light upstairs in the attic kind of goes this weird blue tone. And so, we, instead of just pushing scariness like through high contrast and dark images and cold tones, there was more of a sort of waving set of rules that helped people maybe figure out how you're supposed to feel about the movie.
Well, you're reading my mind because I was also going to ask you, if there was kind of a difference in the way you approach the scenes, because you obviously, like you were saying, you have
Sure.
Hannah and then you have Hannah, but the appendage version of Hannah. So
Sure.
maybe just discuss a little bit more of that in that process.
Yeah, totally. The main thing actually that we found with separating those scenes was, it kind of came about in post. We wanted to make sure that we shot and lit it all cohesively. And we knew that we would, the actors were doing such a good job, and the way the story moves, we knew that it would just separate itself tonally anyway. And it kind of works out that a lot of the scenes with the appendage are either, in these dark green spaces, like the basement, which we actually amp up the green. If you watch the movie again, you'll notice that it goes from sort of like a normal looking fluorescent basement to like Fight Club neon green when they're like forcing her to drink the drink. And so that was pretty helpful that it just happened that a lot of her scenes tied into the color story. But we also, we worked out this process with our colorist where we didn't want, again, it was such a fine tightrope kind of balance to not make it look too serious or sad. So the beginning of the film plays into the color of the lighting more, and it feels a little more saturated. And as she gets more and more fucked up, we pull more and more color out. And so when she hits her like lowest point, I think or at least one of them, you'll notice when she's like running around in her bedroom before that whole failed paella scene with her mom, that's a pretty bleached look. And even when she gets to the house, it's still very, very just, bleached and sick feeling. And then the funny thing was, you'd think that trend would continue as the film goes on, as she gets worse and worse. But honestly, when she switches spots with the appendage, it really, spoilers, we didn't want to take all the fun out of it because the movie still has ridiculousness and fun in the end. I mean, she's on the bed, mean girlsing it with appendage Claudia, like on the phone sexting. And so we had to we kind of ramped it back up. It was like once the appendage took over, we kind of brought some of the life back into it because honestly, that's what the movie needed at the time. And that was, again, something that maybe we didn't even plan on necessarily going into the film is just our colorist, Sam Gilling, really was invested in making sure his grade fit the tone of the movie too. And so it helped that we all sort of tracked it together as we moved along.
Well, what about the scene where the appendage physically is growing from Hannah at the beginning of the film? Like, it looked like it involved a lot of angles. So can just give some insight on things you had to keep in mind when you were trying to capture this?
Sure. The What's crazy about that one is in the short, I would actually have a lot to talk with you about. The short was very involved in that we had to choose which angles it was allowed to move its arms in, which ones it was allowed to speak, because everything was manually controlled. The feature, that puppet was actually the easiest of the puppets to shoot because it was just autonomous and on her side, and we could just shoot it like normal coverage, and it just did what it was going to do. The harder one was what we called stage two, when it crawls out from under the couch, and it's now a 4 foot tall little fucking thing that not only has to speak, but it has to walk, and its arms have to move, and it has to have the semblance of actually, coming across the room towards her. And so that was, that's where things got really gnarly for us, because not only was everyone on the ground, like Hannah isn't running, so I can't be on my shoulder chasing her. She's sitting on the floor, and we don't have the room in there like fit a dolly or a crane to like get that low on her. So, I actually bought an auto mechanic dolly going into this, one of those ones that sits on the ground and just like it's super low profile. And so there exists a video of me like sitting on my heels, dragging myself towards Hannah so I can like chase her on the floor. And then say like that carried over to the appendage, where again it's very low, and shooting low on a budget off it is, I would say, the bane of a lot of DPs, because if you put yourself on a dolly, the head still doesn't get that low to the ground. And when you're shooting a thing like this puppet, I can't do the same handheld like mechanics dolly thing, because there are now 4 people puppeteering this guy. And so there are arms of puppeteers coming into the shot. There's rods. There's like literally an armature stick that's like this thick holding it up so that as they walk it towards. So that had to be all some form of controlled motion. And the only way to do that was, for us on our budget, just put a slider on the ground, a Dana dolly, but like put it straight on the ground and just wheel back. And that gave us the same kind of low perspective, me basically sitting on the floor did chasing Hannah. So it matched, but it meant that because it was on the track, we could control the motion. And so for post, we could just pull the puppet out, shoot the same move, and give them a background plate. And so they could paint out 4 different puppeteers moving the puppet. And it was just a thing that Anna and I had to really consider in prep, was like, okay, when she walks in, it's going to be very easy. The jump scare at the beginning is simple, because she walks in, I can be normal height. Then she falls to the ground, and then the thing comes out from under the couch and chases her across the room. And it was just a sort of when do we switch from handheld to dolly and then back again after that, when she we sort of reestablished normal movie look when she, walks it outside to the basement. But that scene in particular was a bit of a brain bender. Like, how do we technically give the VFX team what they need to make the puppet work, but we still shoot it the way we want to? Very much an interesting challenge.
Well, in terms of the effect that it has on the cinematography side of things, do you have a preference between, practical effects and VFX?
I love both. I think some of the best practical effects have always been cleaned up by post, because it lets you get away with maybe a bigger creature rig or wire work on a creature, but it's still a physical creature. And so you get the best of both worlds. Obviously, there are some films that are favorites of mine that are strictly just practical. But I'm not someone who's a purist. I love shooting green screen, actually. I'm a weirdo. I like green screen, Unreal Wall stuff. It's really fun. I think just a different vibe, different tone. But there's something great about walking onto a green screen set and knowing that like you're fully creating the world here, and whatever you do is, all up to you and the previs team on the VFX side. And so you get to build lighting that might not even be able to exist in the real world. And it's a really fun feeling, but there's kind of no, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't get the same feeling as maybe shooting Hadley when she lifts the shirt up and this little creature is like physically stuck to her side. She couldn't pull it off if she wanted to. It had so many layers of like latex and belts and things holding it in. And her reaction to seeing this real thing on her side definitely does, it makes it more fun for everyone, I think, as opposed to just a tennis ball. It really is a full set wide feeling working with practical effects.
Well, lastly, I did see that you did some directing. So I was very curious if you were planning on doing any more of that in the future.
Right now, it's always on my mind, but I'm the things I'm most looking forward to bringing up are actually I've got a couple TV projects that I've been producing on and trying to get those made that I'd also love to shoot. And so that's been the focus. There's always the plan to maybe direct one of those episodes or something down the line, but right now getting those out and actually fully financed and shot, that's the goal at the moment, because they're two shows that I want to see myself, and one of them is one that I would die to shoot myself. And so I'm hoping that when I can talk more about those are the next things up.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Powell. You have a great day.
Yeah, you too.